Hey guys, it's Danny. Today we're going to talk about two of my favorite things in the whole wide world, orchids and aquariums, planted tanks to be more exact. I thought it would be a great opportunity to make a video combining a little bit the two worlds because if you didn't know, there are people who actually use the water in their aquariums to water orchids. And it just so happens that today my aquarium is due for a good cleaning. It doesn't look that way, but it is due for a cleaning and I'm gonna take you along. And if you read the title or you know my stance on using aquarium water for orchids, you know that I don't believe it's actually very beneficial or incredibly useful in any way. And today I can actually visually show you why. We can also do some tests. We're gonna talk about a lot of things that have to do with aquariums and orchids. So hopefully it's gonna be an educational video for both hobbies. But before we go into that, let me just start with saying that if you've already used aquarium water or you are using, it's okay. It's not going to necessarily affect orchids. So no worries, you didn't actually harm the orchid in any way. Also, you might note there are those paludariums which have water and fish, but on top they have all sorts of plants, including orchids, which sometimes dip their roots in the water. That's fine. This water is actually very clean and not dangerous in any way, so everything is okay. My issue is with the water we're extracting from the aquarium as part of the water change. That's the issue, of course, if we're making correct water changes. So that's the first thing we're going to talk about today, making a correct water change with our aquarium. A little warning, this video might get pretty long, like most of my videos tend to get whenever we get into a very interesting topic, because I want to explain a lot of things about aquarium keeping and also about orchid keeping. I want my information to be complete, explained, and as correct as possible. And I cannot do that in 3 minutes. So if you're not up to that, I'll see you guys next time. But if you want to stick around, grab a snack, grab a beverage, hoping you're having lunch, let's get into the subject. Now, some of you might know a thing or two about aquariums, but for those of you who don't, well, one of the things we are striving to obtain in an aquarium is a natural balance, a natural equilibrium, one that will not let this water become very unsuitable for fish. We want the water to be safe, to be naturally balanced. And for the main part, we do that with what we call cycling. This makes sure that we never have very dangerous quantities of nitrates, nitrites, and ammonia in our aquarium. However, even with this balance, it doesn't mean that everything can work without our input. It is really, really hard to have a self-sustainable environment, and most of us do need to help this balance remain a balance. And the main thing we do to help this balance remain a balance is a water change, meaning removing water from this aquarium and adding fresh, clean water. And as I was saying, for the most part, with a balanced aquarium, this water is absolutely clean. If it maintains the fish healthy, it should be okay for orchids as well, right? It is. But see, the problem is, this is not how we do water changes. Water changes not only replenish this water and maybe remove some of the nutrients, let's say, that can build up in an aquarium, but they also remove debris and fish waste and algae and other stuff that becomes a little bit too much in an aquarium. So things like that shrimp coat over there, algae formation on the glass or on the plants, and also fish waste, they're also removed through a water change. So let's go ahead and do that right now so you see what type of water I'm actually extracting from my aquarium. So first of all, I want to get rid of algae deposits on the glass and, if possible, whatever formed on the plants as well. For this, I will be using a sponge. There are also tools on the market which help you out if it's slightly awkward to put your hand in the aquarium. So let's go ahead and do that really fast. Alright, so I cleaned the glass of my aquarium and I tried to scrub a little bit the algae. We want to do all of these things before we actually extract the water because the more algae debris we pull out of the water, the better for the aquarium. All fish tanks have algae. Some have less, some have more, especially with planted tanks which use very nutrient-rich soils. It's very, very common to have algae issues in the first few months of the aquarium. It's part of what we call new tank syndrome, but staying on top of them through mechanical means is a very useful thing that you should do. And as I was saying, we always want to do it before we extract the water, just so we put everything in the water mass so that we remove them with the water change. Second, extraction of water. As I was showing you in the beginning, we don't just put a cup and extract the water in the aquarium, we use aquarium siphons, or we should use. And you've probably seen them in pet shops a million times already. Aquarium siphons are these plastic hoses that have a pump on one end and most of the times a sort of bell on the top. We put one end in the aquarium and with the other we pump the water out and we dump it in a bucket. Now you can go more professional with this in a water pump, but I'm not gonna go into the details. This is my orchid channel. However, it is important that I show you how to properly siphon the aquarium. So if you have a normal aquarium without a nutritious soil, without carpet plants, you can actually use this bell, and what you would do is dig it a little bit in the soil and then put your finger on the other end of this siphon and let everything fall back. Quartz soil or gravel is heavy and it will fall back and all the debris will stay in and you can siphon them out. If you have planted tanks with lightweight nutrient soil and carpet plants, you obviously cannot do that because you're gonna pull everything up. Sometimes you can actually have a nutritious substrate under the soil, which will cloud all of the water if you mess it up. So with planted tanks, we don't actually use that bell. We do, however, use the siphon, and we do try to move a little bit the debris on top so we siphon it out. So I'm gonna show you exactly how that looks like. And here's the first bucket of water that I took out of my aquarium. Some people like to extend the hose until the sink. I don't want to do that because, as you've probably seen, I have shrimps. They're extremely curious whenever I siphon the substrate. And if I siphon them by mistake, I want to be able to save them from the bucket. Also, they have a lot of babies. Anyway, long story short, I prefer buckets to double check what I took out of the aquarium. And in case you cannot properly tell, let me just get a little bit of water here so you see exactly what I took out from my aquarium. And keep in mind, my aquarium is fairly new and it didn't really have time to become super dirty, but look at that. Do you see how much debris I managed to pull out? Not to mention actual algae, shrimp sheds, and all sorts of stuff that I really don't want in my aquarium. As you've seen, my aquarium has very tiny fish, it has shrimp, but there are aquariums with bigger fish. With bigger fish comes bigger waste. So in some aquariums, you can actually pull out a lot more dirt than I just did. So let's think about it. If we don't want this dirt in our aquarium because it's gonna debalance things, do we actually want this dirt in orchid pots? Not really. And here's why. Orchid pots are small confined spaces as well. We flush them periodically to remove excess salt buildup because the orchids cannot utilize everything. We also flush them to remove excessive organic debris and so on and so forth. On top of all that, most of the orchids we can grow in our home are epiphytic, meaning they don't grow in soils. Hence, many of us use bark, sphagnum moss, and other materials to grow them properly. These materials are not very friendly to nitrifying bacteria, which is the bacteria that takes care of fish waste and other things in the aquarium. These bacteria are naturally found in rivers, lakes, seas, and also in soils at lower depths. These places offer water and oxygen, and the balance between water and oxygen is very hard to maintain in an orchid pot. Furthermore, we usually let orchid pots dry, and even if we don't let them dry completely, they dry enough to kill off a part of our bacterial colony, if there ever was one. Furthermore, sometimes we water with tap water. Chlorine affects bacterial colony as well. That's why we never actually wash the filter at the sink. We rinse it in aquarium water. In an aquarium, the bacterial colony is everywhere, on every surface. A great chunk of it is in the medium and also in the biological filtration materials in the filter. And even with all of these places with optimum conditions for bacteria, we still need to intervene and remove part of this fish waste. Can you imagine how much bacteria we would need in an orchid pot to do a good job and how much effort it would take to maintain it alive, it's not doable, and most of the times it's simply not possible, especially in home conditions. It's not possible outside either. It really doesn't matter if your orchid is indoors or outdoors. Bacteria are everywhere around us, even in the air. So it doesn't matter if your orchid is outside or inside, the fact that you let it dry out slightly is enough to kill off the bacterial colony, and the orchid medium we're using is enough to not make a proper good home for these bacteria. So do we really want to put all that fish waste in an orchid pot? Not really. Orchid pots are not good compost bins. We want to maintain both orchid pots and aquariums clean. If you think about it, an orchid's natural habitat is a pretty clean environment. There's never any excess organics, excess salts, excess anything, because the tree trunk gets frequently washed by water. It doesn't only get wet, but it actually gets flushed, and everything that's excessive just flows to the base of the tree. So orchids themselves don't actually live in compost piles. Yes, they do take advantage of whatever debris are decomposing around them, but it's never excessive. Certainly not as excessive as a plant which is growing in soil, where pretty much everything that flows from the trees collects. But now let's presume that you're not actually siphoning the substrate, which you should if you have a substrate, but let's say you're not. Or you just have a very big aquarium, you've already siphoned everything, and now you're just extracting normal water. Could this actually be good? Well, provided there's nothing in the water such as algae and other things which could make it overloaded with organics, yeah, it could be okay, but is it actually useful? Not necessarily, so let's talk about that. Aquarium water is known to have nutrients, but what nutrients and in what quantities? Well, those can differ wildly from person to person, from aquarium to aquarium. I'll take my example first. I have a planted tank with a lot of plants which consume nutrients. Generally speaking, planted tanks really don't have a lot of nutrients in their water mass. If there is excess, algae will make sure to take that. There will always be a little something there, but that little, in good conditions, is very little. And that's the key to planted tanks, maintaining everything balanced and never having excess of anything. So the water extracted from this type of tank is gonna be really poor in nutrients for the needs of a big orchid. In tanks with bigger fish and fewer plants, you have more chances to find nutrients. But again, what nutrients and in what quantity, that can be a little tricky to find out. However, we can actually measure the most abundant nutrient in aquarium water, and this is nitrogen in the form of nitrate. Hopefully. Side note, if you have ammonia or nitrite, you need to do something about it fast because those things are very, very damaging to fish. Now, since I do have aquarium tests and I actually did a video on how to use them and what they mean, links down below if you're interested, let's test the level of nitrate in my aquarium water. Comparing it with our scale here, we can see that the level of nitrate in my aquarium is actually very, very close to zero, maybe a little bit in between 0 and 10 milligrams. And this is a very normal reading for heavily planted tanks, because the plants, hopefully only the plants, but sometimes the algae as well, just absorb that nitrate straight away. Nitrate is plant food, and with orchids, we use the very same substance. If you look on the label of many orchid fertilizers, you will see that the main source of nitrogen is actually nitrate. Yes, there will be some fertilizers which will have ammonia or other sources, but at the moment, nitrate is considered the best and safest way to deliver nitrogen to orchids. So let's look at the MSU fertilizers label. This is one that I'm using for the past 3 years or so. We can see that nitrate is the main source of nitrogen, and also if we read about the product, we can see that they do recommend a total quantity of 100 to 150 parts per million nitrogen. And if you follow the label, of course, you will deliver that to your orchid. So if we think about our measurement of almost zero nitrate, well, the thought of actually using aquarium water as fertilized water doesn't really make sense. If you have other nutrients such as phosphates or iron or other things, well, it depends. It really depends on the type of aquarium, how many fish you have, how much you feed them, and so on and so forth. You might have those nutrients, you might not. You might have too much of those nutrients or too little of those nutrients to sustain a proper orchid. And sure, some orchids are not heavy feeders. Usually the orchids which we can keep in terrariums or paludariums are tiny with very slow growth. If they always have contact with the water, you might pull it off, but for feeding things like Phalaenopsis or Vandas, the aquarium water used as nutrient is not enough. And I wanted to talk about this because many people in their arguments for aquarium water say that orchids benefit from the nutrients in the aquarium water. And as you can see, I don't think that's the case. Some aquariums though can actually condition in a way the water. Depending on what type of animals you have in your aquarium, for example, if you have snails or invertebrates, you might actually obtain a water with a decreased hardness from the aquarium. Also, if you have a nutritious soil which is known to lower total hardness, you can actually have softer water in your aquarium than the tap water. So from that point of view, yeah, it could be better than other sources of water, of course. But again, not all aquariums will condition the water the same. Furthermore, there are fish which simply require very hard water and high pH. In that instance, the water in that aquarium is really not suited for orchids. So even if aquarium water might end up being a little bit better than your tap water or other sources, it's not always the case. And you need to actually test the water to know for sure that it is better than tap water. And if chlorine was your issue, well, you can simply buy a dechlorinator solution from the pet shop, which I'm guessing you're already using for your aquarium. Use it on the tap water and problem solved. And lastly, aquarium water changes generally are partial. We never want to remove all of the water from the aquarium, give it a good scrub with detergent, and then fill it up with fresh new water. Partial water changes can vary from 10%, 30% to 50% in the case of planted tanks. And depending on the size of the aquarium, this might just not be enough. For a few orchids, yeah, sure, it could be, but for an entire collection, it's not. So it's not really a reliable source. But do keep in mind that very, very rarely you need to change all of the water in the aquarium. However, you can actually do something with that water if you don't want to let it go down the drain. You can actually use it with your garden or your potted plants, which are potted in soil. In soils, bacteria have a much better life. And in a garden, there is so much space that all of that debris which came from your aquarium will be degraded really fast. Even with potted plants, both outdoors and indoors, you have a much better chance of all of that debris being decomposed and actually utilized by the plants. The bigger the pot, the better. The downside to using all of that debris from your aquarium with your potted plants is the smell. But hey, if you've ever used organic fertilizers, I don't think you're gonna be surprised. I actually think these things smell worse than what comes out of your aquarium. So yeah, I think there is a chance that things will start to smell a little bit, but hopefully not too much. And in the end, I know there are many people who do insist that their aquarium water is perfectly fine for orchids, and in the end, they're your orchids, you can actually do whatever you want to them, so whatever. I don't think it's so detrimental unless it has a lot of waste organics. But if you were ever wondering, well, now you know my point of view, and I do encourage you to just research. I will link you down below to some articles which talk about the nitrogen cycle and other things related. But of course, everybody should know by now, Google is your best friend. Do research all of these things and do try to make an opinion of your own rather than going with whatever random people say on the internet. It's always good to make an opinion of your own. And I hope now you know what to search for. Do see if what I say in this video applies to you or is even a thing, right? So that said, thank you so much for watching. This was very fun. And of course, if you want to stay up to date with my aquarium endeavors, I'll link you to my second channel down below in the description as well. And with that said, you know the drill. Like or dislike this video below, subscribe to my channel for regular orchid videos, tutorials, Q&As, and other fun orchid subjects. And if you'd like to support the channel, do consider visiting the merch store down below in the description. And with that said, I'll see you guys next time. Bye!